Hey Al,
Hey, Barry.
why are there not very many vampire philosophers?
Why?
They have a lot of issues with self-reflection. It's time for Compelled Duel. Hello everybody, and welcome back to Compelled Duel. I'm Barry.
And I'm Al.
And we are usually a single-player co-DM'd D&D 5e actual play podcast, but we told you last week things are going to be getting a little freaky around here. 40,000 years later.
Dorella, you find yourself on the beach again. The sand is soft and gritty under your feet. The water is rushing in and out, never quite touching your feet, but lapping toward you like it's trying to draw you closer in. And the lady with the cloak is there again. Barry, please describe your character.
Sure thing. Dorella Valcyne is a young Selayan elf girl. She's about 35 years old, so the equivalent of about 7. She has long, dark hair and curling black horns. Silver eyes that are all iris, they don't have whites, with slit pupils, sharp pointy canines, kind of silvery gray skin, and in various places on her body, but most noticeably around her eyes and up across her forehead, she has patches of silver scales. And she is just standing on this beach, the wind whipping her hair across her face and her nightgown around her legs, staring up at this figure in the cloak.
This tall figure in the glimmering, fine Stormcloud cloak leans down and reaches a hand to push some of your hair out of your face and says, "Hello, Dorella. It's good to see you again."
Hi, Kiva! What is it this time? Are we gonna have another earthquake?
You see, under the shadows of their hood, the strike and flash of one of Kiva's lightning bolt smiles. And then she says, "I'm not here for the village tonight, darling. I'm here for you."
Huh, that's scary. Dorella has been hanging out with Kiva for several years at this point, though, so she's not actually that frightened. She just kind of shrugs and sits down on a big piece of driftwood. Okay.
Kiva sits next to her on the same piece of driftwood, kind of mirroring her posture, which looks very funny because she is 8.5 feet tall. "What have they told you about your history? About the landing?"
Dorella frowns at her for a second, but then looks up at the sky. They talk about it in church sometimes. They say a long, 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 long time ago that Selayans lived up there. And she points up at the moon. And that the world was gonna end and really bad stuff was gonna happen, so you and Kimryl took your priests and brought them down here to Illiri because you're death gods and you were shielding them from death.
The truth is a little more complicated than that.
Okay, so what's the truth?
Kiva adjusts the folds of her cloak. Well, just before the landing, something very bad happened to Kimryl and I, and we made a little mistake trying to fix it. And because of that mistake, the two of us had to leave Slaya, along with our most loyal and most trusted followers.
Oh. So, you didn't save everybody, you got kicked out.
Kiva winces. You could put it that way.
So, why the story with the world ending and you saving everybody? Why not just tell the truth?
Well, frankly, sweetheart, the truth would have been a PR nightmare.
What's PR?
It stands for public relations. It doesn't matter. The point, Dorella, is that we think we figured out a way to fix everything.
And she reaches out one hand and just cups the side of Dorella's cheek. The tips of her talon-like nails just barely scratching into the underside of her chin.
And we think that you can help us.
And Dorella, you wake up with seawater filling your mouth. You are standing chin deep in the ocean. Just a little bit down the beach where it slopes down into the ocean from the island that your family lives on. Loex Tolgalen.
Elandor, it is pitch black dark where you are. You can't see a thing. You couldn't see your own hand in front of your face if you wanted to. So with that sense not available to you, you start trying to branch out and see what else you can perceive. There's something solid under your hands and knees where you are crouched, but it also feels wet. But then out of the darkness behind you, you see a light that briefly flashes, rotates off to the side, and disappears. A few seconds pass, and it happens again. And again. This very familiar, circling pattern of light. You turn to look at it, and it passes across your face before leaving you in darkness again. Al, please describe your character.
Elandor Valcyne is also what has become known as a Chilean elf. He is also 35 years old. He has this messy, shaggy shock of snow-white hair. Usually his mother keeps it a little shorter than it is right now. It's fallen into his eyes. He has sort of jagged, also snowy white horns going back from his forehead, and a very similar pattern of silvery scales on his forehead and around his eyes to his sister. But his eyes are big and bright blue with the slit pupils.
You are looking around trying to find the source of this flash of light, when directly behind you, you hear this bone-dry, raspy voice that says, "Hey, kid."
Elandor, for reasons of his twin is blunter than a baseball bat, has gotten very good at being very charming to authority figures. So he turns back around, puts both hands behind his back, and kinda bounces on the balls of his feet, looking as much like a little cartoon boy who's about to put a finger to his dimple and go, "Who, me?" as he possibly can. And he says, "Hi, Lord Kimryl. What can I do for you?"
This rhythmic beam of light that is cycling through the darkness keeps up, and as you turn, you see this massive, 8 feet and some change tall, skeletal figure. Silver-tipped fangs, long spiraling horns coming back from his head, twin spots of bright purple light in the empty shadows of his eye sockets. He tilts his head to the side as if he is considering your question, and then replies,
"Quite a lot, actually. It's a long story. To make it as short as possible, you ever mess up just so bad? Like really bad?"
One time Dora threw a cabbage at Brother Haldir, and she ran, but I thought it was better to hide, and he caught me. So, yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, the thing I'm talking about went exactly like that.
That sucks. You're big. How can they make you sweep up the whole church?
Son, when I tell you that I have been sweeping the proverbial church for the last 40,000 years. Anyway, the point is, Elandor, that sometimes we mess up really bad. And when we find an opportunity to fix it, we would do almost anything to do so, right?
I guess, yeah.
I messed up really bad a long time ago. And I think I can fix it. But I need your help.
Okay. What do I have to do?
For now, just accept a gift. Use it, get stronger with it. And then one day in the future, I'll ask you to use it to help me out. But it's important for you to know that you can say no. You have a choice. You always have a choice. Remember that.
Okay.
You feel a very large skeletal hand come down on top of your head, the bones ruffling your hair a little bit.
Ew.
And in time with that touch, you feel this cold, creeping feeling go down your spine, out across your shoulders, and down your arms through the tips of your fingers. And before you can ask what that was, that rhythmic light flashes again, and you wake up. You jolt out of your trance to bitter, cold, and damp air blowing in your face. You are standing on the very narrow strip of balcony that is around the lantern room at the top of this lighthouse that your family has been responsible for taking care of for untold years. You can kind of tell where that flash in your dream was coming from now, because the light inside is still turning around and around and around, illuminating the gray, stormy sea off the coast of this island. Trancewalking has always been a problem with you. You have heard your mother talk about it pretty much since you can remember. So this isn't a horribly uncommon occurrence, especially with these prophetic dreams that you get. But what is uncommon is that as you're standing, leaning against this railing, you see something coming up the beach. Two small humanoid figures, one cast into sharp shadow as this light behind you keeps rotating, and the other one glowing like a beacon through the night. They are moving their way, looking like they're struggling a little bit over the wet sand, up towards the front door of the lighthouse.
Elandor is gonna go back inside, and as soon as he thinks he's within earshot of his parents, he's yelling, "Mom, it happened again!"
You're headed down this spiral staircase that passes the door to your parents' room, and your mother comes rocketing out into the hallway. She is a middle-aged Selayan woman. She looks very similar to you. White hair, white horns, blue eyes. And she looks panicked. The wards didn't go off. Is she still in the house?
I don't know. I don't think so.
How? I checked the door before bed. Did she go out the window? What? From further back in your parents' room, you hear your father mumbling something, still half in his trance, and your mom just totally ignores him, throws on a dressing gown, and goes charging down the stairs past you.
Okay, Elandor's going with her.
The two of you head quickly down the rest of this spiral staircase into the grand open foyer that takes up the entire bottom of this lighthouse. By the time you make it down, because you're little, you've got short legs, your mother is already throwing open the big, heavy double doors. And standing outside on the threshold are your twin sister Dorella, soaked to the bone, waterlogged nightgown clinging around her legs, hair plastered down to her face, and your very good mutual friend, Lorray. Lorray is weird to look at. And you have this paradigm as somebody who is a little weird to look at yourself. Due to the nature of a lot of recessive genes, there are not a lot of people in the land of Astraria that look Selaean anymore, in the tens of thousands of years since the landing. Most of the people you know have no horns. They still have the slit pupils like you do, but their eyes have whites to them. They have kind of the same pointy canines, not as pointy. Very few people have scales, and as a rule, people tend to have cool bluish undertones to their skin. There are not a lot of people that look like you, but there are also not a lot of people that look like Lorray. She is something that you have heard referred to as a night elf, who are said to be the people that were living in Astraria around the time of the landing. She is a very slight, slender little girl about your age. She has long, very straight, bone-white hair, eyes that are solid black, no pupils, no whites, just ink black. These big, bat-like ears that you notice twitching and moving around of their own accord as she's listening to her surroundings. And she glows. A lot of what would be considered Astrarian elves, quote-unquote, now, have a subtle bioluminescence to them. They glow softly in the dark. Lorray puts off bright light in a 5-foot radius. You can see her glowing even under midday sun, although you don't see her in the daylight very often. She is nocturnal. When you're standing this close to her, you can actually see the beautiful spider web of blue veins under her very pale skin, pulsing and lighting her up from the inside.
So true, although it must be said that this perception for Elandor is a little bit colored by the fact that he's decided he's in love with her.
Good for him. Lorray also moves in a way that is very different from the way that you are capable of moving. She has something going on with her joints. You're not sure anatomically what it is because you're a kid, but she can skitter up a tree backwards. You've seen her do it. And that is evident in the motion of her ushering your sister forward over the doorstep. She looks up at your mom and grins, this big smile full of sharp, shark-like teeth. Hi, Lady Valcyne. I found Dora in a riptide, so good thing I was taking a walk. She's a little damp, but she'll be okay, I think. I know it's very late for all of you. Do you want me to go home?
Elandor, from behind his mom, says, "No!" And then pauses and stands very stiffly for a moment and then says, "That would be rude, right, Mom? We should give her a snack."
Your mother blinks slowly. You can tell she is still not fully awake yet. Of course. Lorray, you know where the kitchen is. Elle, honey, if you could just go help her with that. I need to go get Dora dried off. Come on, sweetie. And she spirits your sister away up the stairs, and you are left standing in this big open foyer with Lorray.
Elandor brushes both sweaty palms off on his pajamas.
You know, if you two are going to grow up and take care of the lighthouse one day, it might be a good thing for both of you to learn to swim better. I did have to pull Dora out of that riptide kicking and screaming. Does your mom still make those hand pies that I had last time I was over?
Yeah, she does. Actually, we made a batch of cherry ones yesterday.
Cool. She walks right by you. She knows the way to the kitchen.
Elandor stares down at the floor for a long moment, in the despair of a young boy who knows he just made himself look like an idiot in front of the prettiest girl in the world, and then follows her.
You walk into the kitchen, and Lorray is in the process of skittering up onto a counter and sitting down very primly. You can't actually see much in the kitchen because Lorray has not bothered to turn on the lights. You know that she can see in the dark. And her eyes, cat-like, are just reflecting out of the darkness at you as you hear her chomp down on a hand pie. So anyway, Dora was really out of it when I pulled her out of the water. I think it's happening again. Do you think she had one of the dreams?
Elandor, as he's turning on the lights, puts one finger to his mouth and goes, "Shh! You're not supposed to know about that, remember? You'll get me in trouble."
You go to light one of the lamps sitting on your kitchen table, and Lorray flinches back from it with a and then squints at you very hard, like she's trying to block out a lot of the light.
"Sorry, I can't see."
"It's fine, you just gotta warn a girl. Anyway, I'm sorry I brought up the thing. Why is your mom so weird about that anyway?"
"She always says nothing good happens to prophets. My uncle used to be able to see the future."
Lorray shrugs and reaches down to grab another hand pie off this plate. Fully, literally unhinges her jaw and just pops the whole thing in their hole and chews for a few more seconds. "Well, yeah, that makes sense. Remember a couple years back when Dora insisted that we all go take cover and we didn't really know why, but then that huge hurricane hit?"
"Yeah, I remember."
"And I mean, no one can beat you at cards. Bluffing just doesn't work."
"It's not just cards, it's..." He looks down at his hands and kind of wrings them together for a second. I can just kind of tell when people aren't telling me the truth. Which is good. I mean, people should tell the truth about stuff. But, anyway, my uncle was a priest, and my mom says he got sick. Like, not, and he kind of gestures at himself. Not body sick, like, and he kind of puts a hand on his chest. Like, in here, sick. And that's why we can't tell anybody about the dreams.
She hops down off the counter and presses her hand over yours where you're holding it to your chest. "You know I'm not gonna rat you out, right?"
I know. Mostly.
"Am I lying?"
No.
"Yeah, exactly. Look, I gotta get home. If I miss lunch, my mom is gonna lose her mind. Go check on Dora. We'll talk about this some other time, okay?"
Okay. And he kind of moves the hand that's not on his chest to cover hers. "Thanks for bringing Dora home. And not ratting me out."
"I mean, of course I saved her, and of course I'm not gonna rat you out. Don't be weird."
Yeah, right. And he's gonna dart forward and give her a little kiss on the cheek.
With how close you are to her, you can see the capillaries in her cheeks go bright, luminescent blue as the blood rushes to her face and she blushes. "Yeah, all right, I'm gonna go. Bye, Elle."
Yeah, bye. He's gonna rush past her up the stairs. He's out.
You head up the stairs past your mother, who is on her way back into her bedroom, onto the floor above where you and your sister stay. Dorella's door is open, and you hear kind of heavy, anxious breathing coming from inside.
Elandor is gonna stop, kind of shifting his weight on his feet. And then he's gonna go in.
Your sister, much drier than the last time you saw her, is curled up in one corner of her bed, fresh nightgown on, hair braided down her back, with her head in her hands, just hyperventilating.
Elander's gonna scramble up next to her and just try to get one of her hands in his own.
She squeezes your hand back super hard. Did you have a dream too?
Yeah. I woke up in front of the light again.
Yeah, and I've woken up on the beach before, but not in the water like that. I think something's coming. I think they want something.
Yeah. And then he squeezes her hand a little harder.
As you do that, something strange and unprecedented happens. You and your sister have never demonstrated any kind of magical ability before. Your mother does magic, but it is more along the lines of druidic magic. She works a lot with the energies of nature and the energies of the tides and the sea surrounding the island. But as you squeeze your sister's hand, there is a rumbling under you across the floor, and an odd glow that comes out around your joined hands. Mechanically, this is a thaumaturgy spell. And mechanically, you are now both clerics.
Elander lets go of his sister's hand instantly. What was that?
Your mother had very obviously dried Dorella off before you came in here. But after you yank your hand away and you look back up at her, you see that there is water dripping off the ends of her hair and soaking in big droplets through the thin fabric of her nightgown. Outside, there is a deep roll of thunder that rattles the panes of her window. And she clutches her hands together in her lap and says, I don't know, but I think we're gonna find out.
Dorella, a cold wind blows off the sea, off the coast of mainland Astraria. The slightly younger of your twin daughters, Anya, is clinging to your leg and swaying against the wind. The slightly older of the twins, Alora, has been trying to run off through the crowd for the last 20 minutes, and it is about to make your head explode. If kid leashes existed in Astraria at this era, you would have one. Barry, please describe your character.
Dorella obviously is quite a bit older than the last time we saw her. She's in the equivalent of about her mid-20s. She's got her hair braided back around her horns and then pulled into a low ponytail, and is wearing a set of priest's robes that have the symbol of Kiva on the front, and sort of turning her spellcasting focus, which is this orb of stormy magic, back and forth between her hands. She gets Elora by the back of her robes as she tries to run off again, yanks her back. Both of the twins look a lot like her. They have the same dark hair and the same curling horns. Their dad was another Chilean elf dude that Dorella's not with anymore. She sighs deeply and looks around at her surroundings.
The dock for the ferry boat leading to Loex Tolgalen is not ever super crowded, but you recognize a good few of them and assume that they're all people that are headed back for the funeral as well. The ones you don't recognize, you assume, are here for you, and you are studiously trying to ignore them, I would assume.
Yeah, anyone who would try to harass her for a miracle on the day of her mother's funeral is getting ignored at first and then struck by lightning if they don't back off, so she is not engaging with that group of people at all.
The ferry is pulling away from the dock behind you. There are murmurings in the crowd from some people, and others are starting to move up the road from the docks toward the village. As the crowd parts in front of you, with one hand fisted in the back of Alora's robes, and the other resting on top of Anya's head, you see your brother down the dock. Elandor obviously has also gotten a bit older. He has his hair kind of loose around his shoulders. He looks like what rest he has gotten over the last couple days has been pretty hard won. He is also in dark, formal priestly robes with the jagged knife symbol of Kimryl on a medallion around his neck. And he raises one hand in a little wave. Elora breaks out of your grip instantly, just darts forward yelling, "Uncle El!" And Elandor, no question, drops to his knees to grab her.
Dorella's also gonna walk over and give him a big hug. Hey, sorry it took so long. We got sidetracked in Ilneus. I had to help out with the drought situation.
He hugs you back super tight and then gives you a strained smile and says, "Yeah, I figured it was something like that. Things have been bad up north as well."
And apparently they're moving further south. She looks down at both of the girls and kind of winces. She doesn't want to talk about this right now. But we can have that conversation in a little bit. Girls, do you want to go play with your cousin?
The girls both yell enthusiastically. Elora starts taking off down the street, and Elandor reaches out and gets her by the shoulder. "Easy there, Ellie. You want a piggyback ride?" And he scoops her up, groans. Femurs and finger joints, you're getting heavy.
Yeah, Dorella knows the way. She's gonna grab Anya by the hand and start walking up towards the lighthouse.
You make your way up through the village and to the grand lighthouse that dominates the skyline of the island of Loex Tolgalen. In the sitting room area at the base of the lighthouse, there are more than a few people gathered. Astrarian funeral practices are a bit rambunctious, a bit rowdy, by which I mean there are about 4 people in your house, Dorella, and all but maybe 6 of them are drunk.
And there's about to be one more drunk person. She's gonna grab the nearest glass of wine she can.
You grab a glass of wine, down it. As you lower it back onto a table, you hear out of the crowd, "Auntie Dora!"
She's going to turn around, ready for a scoop and hug.
You turn, ready to scoop, and your niece, Oriana, who's a little bit older than your 2 daughters, but not much, like the human equivalent of about 5, in a formal outfit for this funeral with her hair in little pigtails, sprints out of the crowd and just runs up to you. She takes a lot after Lorray in that she is very pale, almost bluish. She is not quite as luminescent. In the light of this funeral, you can't really see any glow coming off of her. And she has inherited Elandor's slit pupils and fangs, but otherwise she looks very much like her mother, who, coincidentally, is sliding out of the crowd behind her. Her long, graceful, quadruple-knuckled hands wrapped around a coffee cup, squinting in the light, her ears moving rapidly as she makes a little chittering sound out of the corner of her mouth. Because of how photosensitive Lorray and all night elves are, she can't really see what's going on. It's too bright in here. So she is trying to echolocate her way through this party without bumping into any drunk people.
Dorella's gonna give her niece one last squeeze before putting her down and moving over to Lorray. Hey, Lorraine, on your left. And then she's gonna give her a big hug as well.
Lorraine gives you a tight hug, and right next to your ear says, "Oh, thank goodness, you're here. That means Elander's back, which means I don't have to manage this."
You, actually might need to hold down the fort for another minute, if that's okay. I need to go have a talk with my brother about the state of affairs.
Lorraine slumps in this hug. Oh, joy.
I promise that we'll be back to work the crowd as quickly as we can. Girls, you all go play. Be good. Don't break anything. And then she squeezes Lorraine's shoulders one more time. You are a gem. I owe you so big. And then she's gonna grab Elandor by the back of his robes and haul him up the big spiral staircase around the outside of the lighthouse up to the lantern room, because it will be the most private place to have this conversation.
You catch Elandor actually in the middle of someone asking him for a miracle. So as you come over and grab for his arm, he gives you a look and then says, "Sir, I am so sorry. It seems my sister requires my assistance. We will finish this conversation later."
I was not kidding about not fucking around with people asking us for miracles at this funeral. As they walk away, she summons a rain cloud over this dude's head.
Okay, you walk away. There is a soft boom of thunder from this very tiny rain cloud that you have summoned. As you leave the room, Elandor snorts under his breath and then leans over to you and says, "Don't you think that was a little excessive?"
No, if anything, I think it was a bit of a muted response. We're supposed to be the ones that are miracle workers, but I think the real miracle is how all of these people managed to find the audacity.
Normally I would argue with you, but it's been a rough week. And you two head up to the lantern room.
As soon as they're up there alone and the door closes behind him, Dora is going to pull him into a big hug and just hold on to him for a really long time. I'm sorry you had to be here alone at the end. I know it wasn't easy.
Elandor hugs her back super tight. No, it wasn't. Thank you for acknowledging that. And then he's gonna kind of slip out of the hug.
Did she... Was it peaceful, at least?
Elandor sucks his teeth, goes to lean against the railing. Dora, I'd love to lie to you, but I have said that it was for a lot of people this week. And honestly, no. It hasn't been peaceful for anyone.
That's what I was afraid of. I haven't seen much with my own two eyes, but the last thing I heard from any of my colleagues up north, things are getting really bad in Omegroth.
Dora, there is no more Omegroth.
She had started to pace, but stops and slowly turns to look at him. What do you mean there's no more Omegroth? It's one of the biggest city-states in Astraria. There's something like 75,000 people living there.
Well, now there are 0 people living there. We got out everyone that wasn't exposed, and everyone that was. We managed to lock down. Things spread quickly. And of course, once the infection reached a sector, the only people that had a chance of surviving were the night elves. And of course, that was enough to fuel all kind of backward, awful sentiment in a bunch of scared, sick people. That was fantastic to have my wife there through. And he reaches up to pinch the bridge of his nose, rubs at his forehead. It's the same as it has been everywhere else. Headaches, bruising, bleeding, trouble breathing, and he makes kind of a gesture with his arms. The heaviness inside. It's the exact same everywhere. I haven't figured out anything. I've tried every spell that I have at my fingertips. I've tried every bit of magic that I can summon up. I have had people that have talents other than my own try it. Nothing works. And I am taking every precaution that I can. I am doing everything. And I am just... I don't know how long even that'll hold out. His eyes cut sideways down toward where the funeral is still going on. And he bites down hard on his lower lip. I'm nearing the end of my rope here, if you couldn't tell.
And if it's as bad as you say, if it's moved this far south... Shit. Dorella also looks down towards where the funeral is still being held. I mean, Mother was getting on in years, but she was healthy, and it took, what, less than a week?
5 days and 7 hours.
Do you think that we should have risked having a get-together like this? Loex Tolgalen is isolated if this gets loose in the village.
Elandor drops his head into his hands. We took every possible precaution while she was sick, and Father insisted, said her memory deserved the attention. I'm inclined to agree, and I wasn't going to say no to a man that just lost his wife. I couldn't.
No, I understand. Listen, Elle, you've had a lot on your plate these last few years. And Father's no spring chicken. He's not going to be able to run this place on his own. Have you thought about maybe just taking Lorray and Oriana and staying here for a bit?
Yeah, I've thought about it. Lorray hates the mainland anyway, and it's not like I'm much good to anybody in all of this.
Dorella's gonna reach out and grab his hand. Maybe it's time to let me shoulder the weight a little bit, see what I can do. There's gotta be something that can be done to stop this. I know it.
He squeezes your hand back super hard and says, have you been having the dreams again, too?
Yeah, every night for a while now. Woke up in a river last week, had to explain that to Anya at 2 a.m. I'm planning on locking my door from the inside tonight.
Good call. Nothing good ever happens to prophets. She was right.
Yeah, she was. And that's one of many reasons she deserves a proper send-off. We'll finish catching up later. Let's get back downstairs. I want to get absolutely shit-faced.
Agreed. And Elandor, without saying anything else, just tows her down the stairs. You are both down among this funeral crowd for a while, engaging in the typical practices of Astrarian funerals, telling stories, making a lot of jokes, dancing, laughing, drinking, more than a little. This funeral winds on through the afternoon, through the evening, into the night. By the time you look up from the bottom of your glass, you see everybody has kind of slowed down for the night. Over on a couch, Lorray is taking micro naps as your twins and Oriana are all curled up in a puppy pile on the couch next to her. Dead to the world. Absolutely no rousing these little shits.
I think Dorella's been talking and drinking with her father and just gives him a quick squeeze on the shoulder and then goes over to pet the twins' hair down while they're asleep.
Neither of them stirs at all as you pet their hair down. They are trancing peacefully, curled up together with their cousin.
She's, hammered and kind of a weepy drunk, so she looks over at Lorray, tearing up, and goes, "We made these, they're so cute."
Lorray gives her kind of a pitying, fond look and just reaches out and pats her oh so gently on the face. We sure did.
I should get them in bed, but they're so cute, and I don't know if I can get them in bed. Will you help me get them in bed?
Lorray raises her eyebrows at you and says, Dorella, I'm gonna take my trance right on this couch. And you're too drunk to be carrying any children.
Yeah. She's gonna stumble off to find Elandor, pull him away from whatever conversation or activity he is engaged in, plant one hand on either of his shoulders, and very seriously slur, "Do you ever think we're screwing up our kids?"
Elandor slams a shot of rum, puts it down, looks over at you, shakes his head, does another one. Nope, I'm not unpacking this with you right now. As Elandor reaches over to kind of shove you into a seat next to him, the front door slams open, and in walks what seems to be a kind of copper-toned Selayan elf. Big copper eyes, copper skin, little patches of copper scales over the cheekbones, the chin, down on the hands, curly copper hair pulled back. They are holding something in a sheath in one hand and a big bundle of fabric in the other. You watch their eyes lock onto you and Elandor, and with a sinuous kind of grace reminiscent of a wildcat, they ooze through the crowd at you, put one elbow down on the table in front of you and Elandor, and then say, "Well, howdy. I come bearing gifts."
Dorella's pretty plastered, but not plastered enough to completely forget her social graces. She sits up and kind of swipes both hands under her eyes really quick. That's really nice of you. Sorry, who are you?
They give you this sharp, mischievous grin. Dominial Sandus, sweetheart. Emissary to the gods. And then they hold this bundle of fabric out to you and slide this thing in the sheath across the table to Elandor. As I said, I come with gifts.
She's gonna take this bundle of fabric and look at it.
You see a long, flowing, stormy cloak. The fabric ripples and changes colors like a thunderstorm moving across the sky. It has this scale mail sort of chest and shoulder piece that it's laced into, and as you gather it into your hands, it almost crackles with static electricity. Across the table from you, Elandor unsheaths whatever his gift is to reveal a long, wickedly jagged, organic-looking knife.
Dorella's gonna put the cape on.
You pull on the shoulder piece, clasp it in front of you, and feel this fabric drape over you. It feels intensely magical. Across the table, Elandor checks the balance on his new knife, looks up at your visitor and says, "Heh, knife to meet you."
Dorella's weepy drunkenness is setting in again. She pulls the cape around her like a blanket and just holds it to her chest, and bites back a sob. This is so pretty. It's so nice. Nobody ever gets me presents, and I've been going through a lot. I mean, my mom just died. And she waves around at the funeral, the dying party, the skull on an altar at one end of the room. Obviously.
Your visitor with the copper eyes nods, sighs, and says, "And they're both plastered." Well, tonight should be interesting. I love my job.
Elandor, you have a weird next few days. The entire tail end of your mother's funeral is mostly taken up by Duminiel Sondis, who, after a couple hours of conversation and several drinks, asks you to call them Mia, talking to you and your sister about the divine gifts that you have both just been bequeathed. Apparently, things in the realm of the gods are stirring, and that deal you made so long ago is about to come due. You keep having the dreams. They are amorphous and hard to interpret. Kimryl's there a few times, but he doesn't say much, really only shows up in flashes. You keep waking up in the lantern room. Your sister, as she said she would, starts locking herself in her room at night, so there are no rescue missions down to the beach to fish her out of the ocean. But she does stay behind on the island for a bit to help you transition into helping your father out with the lighthouse, taking on a bit of the duty that your mother left behind when she passed. You don't see or hear from Mia again. They kind of just disappear after your mother's funeral. But you spend a while getting acquainted with this knife that you've been given. It has a long blade that appears to be made of some kind of bone, wickedly sharp, could cut paper with the slightest press. You figure out that you can channel magic through it, and your magic, when it comes out of it, does seem to be a bit stronger than it usually is. Our camera zooms in a few days after this funeral on you, your sister, and your wife standing on the black sand beach of Loex Tolgalen, watching the 3 little girls playing in the surf, running back and forth. Dorella has her new cape wrapped tightly around her shoulders and is rubbing at the hems of it between her fingers. And Lorraine, with a big parasol propped up over her head, squinting against the sunlight, kind of frowns out at the horizon. So I've been thinking about the schedule now that we're home, dear. You take over the child rearing, and I'll watch the lighthouse at night, so I don't have to deal with this all the time.
That seems like a reasonable division of labor. And he's gonna lean over and give her a kiss on the cheek.
She makes a weird, chittering, purring noise and kind of nuzzles into you. But then she takes a step back and looks up towards the lighthouse. All right, well, we can say that it's starting now. If you two are on baby patrol, I'm gonna go check on your father. He keeps forgetting to eat.
Elandor winces. Yeah, I've noticed that. I'll try to get him involved in cooking. Maybe that'll make it stick, I don't know.
Lorraine puts on this big, fake smile, her serrated teeth glinting in the twilight. Yeah, I'm sure that'll help. Elandor, you've always known when people are lying to you. She turns around and goes back up the beach towards the lighthouse. Over the sounds of the waves crashing into the shore, you hear the shrieking laughter of the 3 children playing in the waves. And Dorella is looking off into the horizon, her eyes a bit unfocused. I know we usually do a big thing for Equinox, but it feels wrong without Mother here. I think maybe we should just do dinner in bed, and the girls and I'll catch the ferry out in the morning.
That sounds wonderful, yeah. Just the 7 of us. I think that'll do all of us some good.
Yeah, I think it will. We could all use a spot of quiet in our lives right now. The 2 of you stand there in this comfortable silence for a moment, and then you feel a little hand tugging at the side of your robes from next to you.
Elandor looks down at whichever of the girls is trying to get his attention.
It's your daughter. Oriana's standing there, her skirts plastered to her legs below the knee from where she's been running back and forth through the surf with her cousins. But she looks very pale and her eyes look kind of glassy. She looks up at you and tilts her head. Daddy?
Elandor immediately squats down to get on her eye level. Yeah, sweetheart, what's going on?
As you get down on her level, you can see a thin stream of blue blood starting to run down out of both of her nostrils. She sways on her feet. I don't feel good. And then she goes down onto the beach like a sack of bricks.
Elandor scrambles to catch her and pulls her really, really close and feels his stomach sink like a stone.
As you pull her in, she feels heavy inside, like her bones are made of stone.
Elandor takes a deep, shaky breath because he knows what this is, and he knows that if it has come for his daughter, then it is coming for him, and it is coming for his wife, and it is coming for his sister and her family. Dora, we need to go back to the lighthouse.
Your sister looks over at where you are holding your daughter's half-conscious body and goes so pale. Her eyes dart outwards back towards the surf, and she cannot bite back the panic in her voice. Girls, come here, now! And the 5 of you make your way back up to the lighthouse. You are barely 2 steps in the door before Lorray comes down and gets your daughter out of your arms, takes her upstairs away from everybody else in the lighthouse. She's the least likely person to get sick from this, and you know this to be true. For a moment, you're left standing in this grand entry hall with your sister and your nieces, and Dorella looks haunted up the stairs where your wife and daughter have just disappeared. I will find somewhere else for Father to stay, but right now I've got to get them to the baths. I've got to get them clean. Girls, come on, come on. They book it outside, and you are alone.
Elandor's gonna go get kitted up with the fantasy PPE, basically. The gear that he has been wearing to walk into plague zones. The long, flowing overrobe, the gloves, the veil. And he's just gonna head up to Oriana's room.
When you get in there, you see your daughter laying in her bed, absolutely piled high with blankets. And your wife is on the floor in similar protective equipment to you, with this big wooden box full of glass bottles open in front of her. Lorray is not a magician by any stretch of the imagination. She's not a healer, but she has helped you enough through these plague zones that she knows what herbs to use to help with some of the symptoms. And her hands are visibly trembling as she's pouring different herbs and things into a mortar and pestle. I'm trying to keep her warm so she can sweat the fever out, but she's burning up, Elle. I don't know what to do.
Elandor goes and sits on the bed next to his daughter. He's going to cast a Greater Restoration and feel it not work. So he's going to cast kind of a modified chill touch around his own hand just to cool it down and then just put it on her forehead.
She is unconscious, but you do notice her relax a little bit. But you see the glowing blue bruising leaching out under her skin and can feel how hot she still is, even through the spell, even through your glove. And you've seen enough of this. She's got days, maybe less. You feel a hand close around your arm and look down to see Lorray's big, reflective, solid black eyes staring up at you from where she's still knelt on the floor. You need to go get washed up and keep your distance. I'm not losing both of you.
I'd prefer to stay with her.
And I'd prefer my husband alive. You should go. There's nothing you can do here that justifies the risk.
You're right. And then, stilted and awkward, he's gonna stand up, and he's gonna walk out.
As you leave, you pass an open door a little further down this hallway, where inside your sister has already tucked both of her daughters into bed. They are soundly trancing, but she is sitting up with a hand pressed to both of their foreheads, just keeping an eye on their temperature, making sure they're not too warm. There's a moment where she looks up, makes eye contact with you, and then just purses her lips and goes back to taking care of her kids.
Elandor's gonna go back to his own room and just try and take his trance. Tomorrow's not gonna be easy.
It is hard to put your mind at ease, but eventually fatigue wins out and you fall into a fitful trance. And you have the dream again. You're on your hands and knees on the completely flat mirror-like surface of this calm water, that rotating light flashing behind you. And on its next rotation, it flashes across the imposing skeletal silhouette of Kimryl, the Lord of Bones.
Hey, kid. I get that it's a bad time.
Elandor doesn't get up. He's still on all fours on this glassy ocean surface. Yeah, you could say it's a bad time.
Kimryl tilts his great horned head at you in such a way that you feel like he would look sympathetic if he had a face to express it.
Unfortunately, it has to be tonight. It's time to make good on our agreement, Elandor. We need your help.
We made that bargain a century ago, when I was a child. And you've waited this long, and now my mother is dead, and my daughter is dying, and you can't give me a week?
There are many things that are in my nature, Elandor. Cruelty is not one of them. I have waited 100 of your lifetimes for this moment, and if I could put it off a little longer for your sake, I would. It has to be tonight.
Elandor, still on his hands and knees, crumples in on himself. He lays his head down on the glassy surface of this ocean in his dreams that he has never gone under in all the years he's been visiting it. He curls it on himself and he sobs. And then, with all the effort, as if he had the world on his shoulders, he nods to himself, and he sits up, wipes his eyes, and says, "Fine. Tonight."
You wake up to a peal of thunder that rattles your bones, and you are no longer in your room. You are standing in this big, circular, great hall at the bottom of the lighthouse, and you see your sister a few yards away from you, also apparently shooting back to consciousness, very bleary. But even more noticeable than that is a third figure that is standing between you. 8 feet and some change tall, wrapped in a magnificent stormy cloak of shifting colors, with these 2 crackling electric blue eyes, and a grim lightning bolt line where a mouth should be in the shadows of their hood. You've never seen Kiva in person, but she looks enough like the statues in every temple you've ever been in that you can put 2 and 2 together. She looks back and forth between the two of you, and then with a voice that echoes like the thunder rolling outside, says,
All right, I think it's finally time you two learned the truth. A very long time ago, Kimryl and I did something that gods should never do. We defied our nature. And in the wake of that decision, this happened.
Kiva turns in a really weird way, and there's a flutter of their cloak, And some stuff that your mortal mind cannot process happens. It hurts to look at it. And when you can see clearly again, Kimryl is standing there, exactly where Kiva was less than a second ago. He gestures down at himself with his skeletal hands.
We got... well, I wish there was a big, intimidating theological term for this. Squished. 2 deities, 1 shared celestial consciousness, an abomination that never should have existed, blah, blah, blah.
There's another ruffle of fabric and that horrible eldritch beholding that you can't process again. And then Kiva's back where Kimryl was just standing.
Shut up, Kimryl. Anyway, for this we were exiled down to Illiri, along with enough of our followers to provide us with adequate belief to survive. Supposedly to learn our lesson and fix what we broke. But by the time we did that...
Cloak ruffle, Kimryl's back.
Celea had pretty much bombed itself back to the Stone Age. The celestial plane up there's almost non-functional anymore. Let's just say our mother attempted a business merger that resulted in bankruptcy.
I don't understand any of those words. What does this have to do with us?
Cloak ruffle, Kiva's back.
We've spent thousands and thousands of years doing our jobs, following our nature, gaining back enough power to, as my brother would so eloquently put it, unsquish us. And now's the perfect time. It's the autumnal equinox, the veil is thin, and, well...
There's another cataclysmic roll of thunder from outside, and you can see the windows of the lighthouse light up as a big flash of lightning comes down into the sea.
We can do it, but for the separation to be possible, we need... vessels.
Across the room from you, you see Dorella go very pale. Vessels? Like our bodies? You want to take over our bodies? Cloak flutter, Kimryl's back. He puts one bony hand up to his chest, kind of affronted.
Oh, heavens, no! Mortal bodies can't hold on to divine essence for that long without massive amounts of external power, and besides, I wouldn't want to walk around wearing Elandor for the rest of eternity. He's really not my style.
Elandor makes a face and then says, "All right, so what do you mean for us to do?"
Cloak flutter, Kiva's back.
We need both of you to hold on to a fragment of our essences, souls, something like that, for a few moments while we build the power to separate ourselves and then let it go when we tell you to. The whole thing will only take a few minutes and neither of you will be harmed. You have our word.
That's it? Just take on more power and then let it go?
Cloak flutter, Kimryl's back.
You would be very surprised what a hard task that is for most people.
Across from you, Dorella purses her lips and runs one hand down along the fabric of the cloak wrapped around her shoulders and nods. All right, I'm in.
Yeah, I suppose I am as well.
Kiva motions you both forward, and then grabs both of your arms and pulls you so that your hands are clasped together. The storm outside kicks up in intensity, the thunder is roaring, the rain is lashing against the stone of the lighthouse outside. The veil is thin from the equinox. You can hear the whispers of ghosts floating in the air around you, low, murmuring voices, something that for a moment sounds heartbreakingly like your mother's laugh. Kiva hovers one hand over where your hand is joined with your sister's. This bright, electric blue ball of energy appears below her palm, sinks into your joined hands, and shoots up Dorella's arm. You can trace it like it's moving through her veins. She doubles over for a minute, looking like she's had the wind knocked out of her. She doesn't appear to have been harmed, but holding this power seems hard. There's that ruffle of a cloak again, that incomprehensible shift, and then Kimryl puts out one bony hand over your joined hands. A ball of misty purple energy comes out into your joined hands with your sister and then shoots up your arm. It is like being hit in the chest with a sledgehammer. Elandor, you are familiar with the process and the feeling of casting magic. You've been able to do it since you were a child. But until now, you don't think you've ever understood the feeling of raw power. Because all of the magic you have ever cast in your life has been done with Kimryl's blessing and at his behest. And as you are holding this core of power inside of you, and it is singing out through your veins with every labored pound of your heart, it is all yours. And you feel like you could move mountains with it.
Elandor lets go of his sister's hand.
There is a rumbling under your feet that almost knocks you prone on the ground. The moment you let go of your sister's hand, this jagged crack goes through the flagstones of the floor between you, and the floor of the bottom of this lighthouse splits open like an egg. From beneath it, you see this pulsing, swirling silver light glowing, as if from underground. Dorella lurches forward, clutching at her chest and heaving for breath. I can't hold it alone, I can't! Ah! And this bolt of electric energy shoots out of her hand, through the crack in the floor, and down into this pulsing light.
Elandor is holding on to this power with both hands. He stumbles, grits his teeth, and says, I'll be back. And then he runs up the stairs.
Okay, where are you going?
Oriana's room.
The scene in there is much the same as when you last left it. Oriana is in her bed under all these blankets, looking very, very ill. Lorray is sitting on the edge of her mattress, petting her hair down. Whips around to look at you, and her eyes go wide. You should not be in here without something over your face. Are you insane?
I need to try something. Elandor sits on the bed, and he's going to cast Greater Restoration.
Usually when you cast magic, your holy symbol that you wear around your neck glows and pulses. But now the magic leaves your body as if you are channeling it out through the very tips of your finger bones. This pulsing silvery purple light that leaches across Oriana's skin and down into her body. There is a breathless pause. A second goes by. 2, 3. And then you watch the bruises under her skin start to retract. The sickly pallor leaves her face. Her eyes open, not cloudy at all, very clear. And she apparently has no heaviness left in her bones because she sits up in bed, blinks at you in confusion. Daddy, what time is it?
Elandor reaches up to cover his mouth with his hand, holds back a sob. It's late, baby. You should go back to sleep.
Lorray is looking at you like you have grown a second head. What did you just do?
Elandor gives her a sharp look and then looks back at Oriana and strokes the hair back from her forehead. It's all gonna be okay, sweetheart. Just lay back down. And he's gonna wait until she has drifted back into her trance to say anything else to Lorray. Once she has, he turns back and he says, I found a solution.
I don't understand. The magic's never worked before.
No, it hasn't. I'll explain everything later. I have to go back downstairs.
She looks very confused and a little bit frightened, but doesn't say anything else to you, just goes and sits back down on the edge of Oriana's bed.
Elander's gonna lean in, kiss her, and say, I love you. Please just trust me. And then he runs back downstairs.
The situation downstairs seems to be worsening. You can hear this storm absolutely raging outside. The wails of the dead through the thin veil of the equinox getting a little more insistent. And this light is still pulsing up through the crack in the floor. Dorella is crumpled on the floor, clutching at her hand like she's been burned by the force of this magic leaving it. And Kimryl is standing there looking extremely perturbed, as angry as a skeleton can look.
Well, I hope you got your errand accomplished. Let's finish this. Let it go.
Elander stays where he is. He looks at his sister. Dora, it worked. And he looks down at his own hands and he says, I haven't been able to cure this thing in years. And I just saved my daughter. And he takes a step back. Think about how many people could be saved by this.
She looks up at you, this silvery light from the hole in the floor beneath you washing across her face. Eyes big and frightened and desperate. I know what you're thinking of doing, and there's no way it won't have consequences. Don't do this.
Dora, 70,000 people died in Omegroth. And he takes another step back. I'm only doing what I have to.
From a couple feet away, Kimryl's head snaps over to look at you, and you can just tell that his expressionless skull is snarling.
We had a deal.
And I had a choice. You said yourself that I had a choice. I'm making it.
He lunges for you, and right before those taloned, bony hands sink into your skin, there is a bright flash of light from this crack in the floor. It goes white and then silver, and then you can see a band of sparkling electric blue snap back from it like a rubber band. It hits the body of what you perceive to be Kimryl, and in the air there is a clap of thunder and a scream of eldritch existential pain as it collides. And when the light fades, neither Kimryl nor Kiva are standing in this room with you. So, mechanically, what you have done is broken that agreement you made with Kimryl that night so long ago. And he has reneged on his end of the deal and taken away your cleric powers. You are not a priest anymore. What you have become is Illiri's very first divine soul sorcerer. Across the room, Dorella gets shakily to her feet and shuffles over to look down through this crack in the floor where that silvery magical light is still pulsing. She looks back up at you, naked fear on her face. What did you do?
Elander looks down at his own hands again, pulsing softly with divine magic. I guess we'll find out. Dorella, it's about 10 years after that night. Things have been hectic in Astraria. The casualties from the plague, although they have slowed since your brother has taken to the road with his new miraculous gift, were heavy. And given that the plague doesn't discriminate between people that have very little social influence and those that have a lot, things have kind of been thrown out of whack. You are back on Loex Tolgalen for summer solstice. And you don't recognize some of the people running around this village. This is the town that you grew up in. This is the place you were born and the place your mother died. And there are faces that are completely new to you.
Don't like that. She's got a very firm grip on both of the twins' shoulders. They're a little bit older now, and is just piloting them up the road towards the lighthouse, looking around her very skeptically.
There are more children outside the lighthouse than you expected, running around, playing some kind of tag game. You see a boy of about maybe the equivalent of 12 fall, skin his knee, and start crying. And then as you're walking up, you see a little girl, a little older, run over and pass a hand over that scraped knee, and the wound vanishes. You do not recognize either of these children. In fact, you do not recognize most of these children. They don't look like anyone you know. They are certainly not people that you have been introduced to. They are entirely new to you. With the exception of a girl the equivalent of about 7, who is sitting on a bench and spots you coming up the path and yells, "Auntie Dora!"
Dorella puts on a big fake smile and runs over to hug her niece. Oriana, sweetie, hi. Have your parents opened up an orphanage that they forgot to write to me about?
Your niece is hale and healthy as anything. There is no sign that she ever caught the plague that wiped out thousands and thousands of people. She's got a big, bright smile. She's bouncing a little bit on her feet. She looks around at these other kids and goes, sorta. It's complicated.
Yeah, looks that way. Probably something I should clear up with your father. Girls, you want to go play with your cousin?
Alora does not need any further prompting. She runs off to join this game of tag, Oriana on her heels. Anya grabs your skirt and leans a little closer to you and looks up and goes, "Is everything okay, Mommy?"
Everything is going to be okay, sweetheart. Go play with your new friends. Just be careful, okay?
Okay. And she follows off after her sister.
Dorella is beelining into the lighthouse to find her brother.
It's early enough in the morning that Lorraine is still awake, and you see her as soon as you walk in. Out of the corner of your eye, she's in the kitchen, crooning softly to your little baby nephew, who is curled up on her chest with both hands fisted in her hair. You don't see Elandor anywhere.
She's gonna go in the kitchen, give Lorraine a hug, give the baby a little smooch on the head. Happy solstice. Hi, sweet boy. Have you seen my brother anywhere? I need to have a conversation with him, and I'd prefer not to spoil a holiday dinner again.
Lorraine laughs and says, "Yeah, I think we'd all appreciate avoiding a repeat of winter solstice 3 years ago."
I want to go on the record saying that I didn't start that, but I damn well finished it. Where is Elandor?
Up in the lantern room again. He said he needed some air, and the children make it hard to say secluded otherwise.
Yes, I bet they do. And she turns on her heel and heads up for the lantern room.
As soon as you open the door, you smell smoke. Elandor is smoking a pipe, which to your knowledge he has never done before. It's super disorienting. He is leaning on the railing, his other hand propping his head up, and looking out over the water.
So here's the thing. Dorella's relationship with her brother has been really rocky ever since the night of the ritual, and she's never been anything else but impulsive, so she just gets him by the back of the shirt and rattles him.
He flails, almost drops the pipe. Did not know you were there. Ah!
I'll give you something to scream about, you stupid bastard. What the hell do you think you're doing?
He gives you a baleful look, looks down at the pipe in his hand, and says, "I mean, I know it's bad for you, but I'm 137, Dora. I can make my own decisions."
I don't give a rat's ass about your bad habits, Elle. I'm more concerned with the sea of children on your front lawn. Part of me wants an explanation, but the vast majority of me is terrified to hear it.
He relaxes a little. He goes, oh, part of my healing work, they didn't have anyone else to look after them, so I just invited them back here.
She gives him a look that positively oozes the sentiment of "you are so full of shit," and crosses her arms over her chest. Oh yeah, so you've taken up philanthropy on top of everything else. That's really big of you. You know, they're singing your praises down in the village. I think I caught a snippet of conversation about old Mr. Shakrana who runs the ferry. They said his boy died of the plague last spring while you were out traveling, and as soon as you came back, you just resurrected him quick as you like. They said the boy came back a little wrong, though, started moving things with his mind, setting things on fire. You don't have any idea what would cause something like that to happen, Elandor, do you?
Elandor pulls away from you, smooths down his robes. It seems that one of the side effects of my new powers are that those I use certain resurrection magics on gain a little bit of arcane talent themselves. And then he gestures down at the front lawn, where, again, there are maybe 24 kids just running around playing tag. The younger they are and the stronger the magic I have to use, the more power they get. And I can't just leave them wandering, so I bring them back here. I didn't expect you to object to there being less dead children in this country, Dora.
Oh, don't you try to turn this around on me just because I'm concerned that you're passing on the consequences of your broken promise to innocent children that never asked for it. We both know what we saw that night. I told you then that your decisions were going to have consequences, and those are your consequences, not theirs.
Oh, like hell you're concerned. Those children would have been dead if not for me. Now they're alive. They're breathing, they're playing, they're telling my wife what their favorite candy flavors are, and they have magical power that they never dreamed of. And not a single one of them has had one of the dreams that we had. You can say what you like about my choices, but the results have been a net good for every child here. For every other child that I've brought back that I got to return to their families. For everyone that I have helped the way I said I was going to, Dorella. And what have you done lately?
She balls her fists up in the fabric of her stormy cloak that she received so long ago, and just trembling hisses, "My fucking best is what I've been doing. I am still out there in the blood and the mud and the shit of it, ending droughts and feeding the hungry and healing the sick as best I can. And I know that your ego's gotten a little inflated now that you have your special powers and your little fan club following you all over Astraria. But you do not get to stand there and imply that I haven't done anything."
Elandor's face softens a little bit, and he says, "You're right. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. I don't mean to minimize the work you do. I just wish you wouldn't act like the work that I'm doing is some unforgivable sin, Dora."
She also softens a little bit. Her shoulders go a bit less rigid. You know how when we were kids, I always knew when a storm was coming?
He smiles a little, nostalgic. Yeah, I remember.
Ever since that night, that's how I feel when I look at you. Whatever it is that you've got going on in this whole operation, there is a dark side to it, and it is coming for you, and for everybody else that you've let it touch. And this is the last time that I am going to stick my hand out and offer to help you out of it, Elandor. I swear, this is the last time.
There's a long moment of silence. And then Elandor bites his lip and says, "Look, if you're worried about the consequences, I'll show you the consequences. Just give me until tonight, all right? Please?"
Yeah, fine. Tonight.
The two of you move through this day,
through the holiday celebrations of summer solstice, you get to passing acquaintance with the various children that your brother has taken in. And as things are winding down for the night, Elandor takes your hand, makes some excuse to Lorray, and he leads you out of the lighthouse, down the road, through the village. He raises a hand and waves at various people in town. And he leads you to a little boathouse on the water. There are a lot like it. Loex Tolgalen is an island of fishermen. This one looks pretty abandoned. He stops outside the door and says, "You wanted to know about the consequences? Fine." And then he opens the door and walks inside.
She's gonna follow him.
There is a little boat on the water. It's big enough for maybe 4 people to sit in. And the only thing in it, as your brother opens the doors and unties it from its mooring, is a big leather trunk.
What's in the box?
Elandor winces and says, "Get in the damn boat, Dorella."
She narrows her eyes at him and gets in the boat, but under the folds of her cloak, her hand is closing around that orb that she uses to cast magic with.
Your brother rows this boat out of the boathouse, away from the island of Loex Tolgalen, into open water. Once you are far enough that you aren't in clear sight of anyone that would be standing on the shore, he stops, steeples his fingers, and starts to speak. You know, I started to notice it the first time I brought someone back. It's not like with a Revivify, with something stronger. It feels more... It feels stranger. There's more of a pull in the opposite direction. It takes power. Power that I have now. But I started to feel it afterward, something pulling at my magic, sapping it. I assumed it was just growing pains. I assumed it would go away, and I kept going. But after, it couldn't have been more than the 20th time, maybe? I don't know. I raised someone from the dead, and then the next person that I went to cure, it stopped working again. And I was right back where I started. Helpless. Afraid. It was like I had been starving, and I had finally gotten a morsel of something to eat, and it was ripped away from me. It was starvation of the soul, Dorella. I couldn't. So I tried to find other ways to stop the outbreak that I was in the middle of. I went back to what I had been doing. I tried to find anything I could do. And I found out that the town I was in had been going through somewhat of a shortage of more material remedies, medicinal herbs. And then I found out that it had been caused by a rich man in the next closest town. And I looked around at these people that were dying in front of me. And I knew that everything I had done to save people would be for nothing, and I knew that... Well, I just wanted to talk to him, you understand. But I got to thinking on the way over. He had agreed to meet with me. Everyone in the area knew what I was, what I could do. He had agreed. I got to thinking. Kimryl said
A mortal body cannot hold on to the kind of power that I have now. Not without an external power source. Gods are fueled by belief in what they are and what they stand for. And my power comes from the god of intentional death. Purposeful death. Dora, you know me, I don't lose my temper often, but I was floundering. I was feeling very purposeful that night. And then he opens the trunk, and you see that there's a corpse in it.
Dorella claps both hands over her mouth and retches. Her eyes are as big as dinner plates as she looks down at what she's being shown. And what? You killed this man and your powers came back?
Elandor looks down at the body in the trunk and says, "No, not this man. This man," and he jostles the trunk a little bit. He looks angry. "This man didn't do what that man did. No, he just hurt a lot of innocent children. A different sort of stain on the world, but a stain nonetheless. No one will miss him, just like no one missed the first one, or the ones that have come between. And with the death of this worthless piece of shit, thousands of people will live. It's all about the numbers, Dora." And then he tips the trunk sideways off the side of the boat, and the body sinks into the water.
Dorella is trying so hard to not just lean over the side of the boat and get sick. She's curled up against this little bench that she's sitting on, both hands still clasped over her mouth. But then eventually she peels them away and clenches them both in her lap. Mortal bodies can't hold divine power without an external source. So you go out and you create more and more people with a divine power in their bodies. Of course that external source is getting hungrier, Elandor. What the hell?
Dora, if you just thought about it logically for a moment, you know how many people I've saved since that night? Thousands. With my own hands. Do you know how many I've had to kill to save those thousands of people?
Don't. I don't want to know.
8. 8 versus thousands. And 8 that were doing immeasurable harm.
And how many more are you gonna have to kill to justify the next 1,000 people that you save? Or the 1,000 after that? Or any of the people that you are dragging back into this world attached to a power that is only going to need more? You put blood on those kids' hands, Elle. Doesn't matter whose blood it is, you put blood on their hands. And I don't know what you thought I would get out of this, if you thought that I would understand or be on your side, but No, I'm not gonna stand by and let you continue greasing up an already slippery slope. This has to stop. The plague's on its way out. We've done what we set out to do. I have access to a commune spell. I can talk to Kiva. I can figure out how we fix this. We need to make this right. We need to finish what we started. Because if you keep going at the rate that you are, you're gonna run out of people whose deaths you can justify. There aren't that many bad people in the world.
Elandor sighs, closes up the trunk. You've always been an idealist. There is an abundance of people in this world, I've found, who should be honored that the way their lives end is in service of the greater good. What I am doing is reducing the harm in the world, whether or not you see it that way.
You don't get to call it harm reduction when you're the one deciding who gets harmed. That's not how any of this works.
He does up the last clasp on the trunk and says, I understand that this is all a lot to come to terms with. I'll let you sit with it for a few hours, and then we can come back to this conversation, alright? I, for one, would like to go to bed. I suggest that you do the same. And he picks up the oars again.
Dorella is silent the entire trip back. She sits there, waits for them to get back to the boathouse, steps out onto the dock and out the door, walks back up to the lighthouse with him, and stops right outside the front door. Say I sit with it a few hours and I don't come around. Say I make it my job to stop you from doing this. What happens then?
Elandor stops with his hand on the doorknob. Well, I would prefer if you didn't do that.
Hypothetically.
Then I suppose it would be a question of which of us stops the other first, wouldn't it? I'm going to bed, Dora. And then he opens the door, goes inside, and shuts it behind him.
So Dorella has a panic attack on the front steps of her childhood home, just, sobbing hysterically for several minutes. But then eventually she gets up, wipes at her eyes, and goes around to the tool shed that is just outside the lighthouse. And she finds the biggest file that she can, like a big steel file. She looks at her reflection in the window pane, realizes that she is a very recognizable person, and that if she is going to do what her conscience tells her she needs to disappear, and presses the side of the file to one of her horns.
Several months later, we pick up at a market in a small town outside of Illiri. A woman with gray skin and patches of silver scales on her face stands at a stall with her 2 young daughters, who both have their hoods pulled down low over their faces. The person manning the stall finishes jotting down her order and says, All right, and the name for that order?
She purses her lips, looks over her shoulder at the storm-tossed gray sea between Illiri and the distant blur of Loex Tolgalen on the horizon, turns back to this woman, smiles, and says, Justice. We pick up a few decades later in the grand halls of the palace in the city-state of Vetlental, the last bastion of resistance that has just recently fallen to the War of Astrarian unification. Al, please describe your character.
Archduke Elandor Valcyne, who will later be known by his descendants and by all of his people centuries down the line as a unifier of nations, as a healer of the sick, and as the first proper saint of the Kimrylite Church, is a slim, Selayan elven man. He has gray skin, patches of silver scales. He is in the equivalent of his early to mid-30s. His hair is tied back, and on top of his head rests a gleaming, enchanted circlet. He leans over a table with war maps on it and looks to the closest of his advisors, one of the people whose faith he has earned through his work. And he says, I understand the practicality, but we've driven them as far as Galshona, and I just think a final push.
From your other side, you feel someone's head nuzzle into your shoulder, and your wife, Illiri, who is very pregnant and looks exhausted, kind of leans over, kisses you on the cheek, and goes, I'm so sorry, I need to lay down. I'm not feeling Wonderful. Update me later, yes?
Elandor turns to her, eyebrows furrowed, and goes, Yes, of course, darling. Rest. And he's gonna give her a kiss back on the cheek.
She leaves, and you are left looking out across this table at your council of advisors. After that last confrontation with your sister on Loex Tolgalen, you kept going the way you were. You brought more people back from the dead, you saved innumerable lives, and every time you felt that pull at your magic. But even more so, you started to feel it when your son Loris got old enough to walk and talk and do things like turn lead into gold, or multiply a plate of food 100-fold. The demands of your power started to grow, and eventually, you ran out of bad people that you could kill to fulfill them. So the natural next step was to gain enough power that you could find bigger and badder people to sacrifice for your cause. This led to the takedown of all of the Astrarian city-states, the justifiable murder of many corrupt nobles, and the place where you are standing now, over this war table, looking at how to counter just how hard your sister has been pushing back against your effort for years. One of your top generals, Connick Tormare, a man whose entire family you saved from the plague, moves something around on one of these war maps and points. I mean, I understand what you're saying, Your Majesty, but we're looking at marching hundreds of people over the mountains in the dead of winter. There will be deaths if we do that. I understand the concern that they'll move. I know that the wizards were able to shut down the portal system, but it seems that your sister has gotten access to a keystone. If the strike teams that have been coming out of the woods at our people are any indication.
Elandor rakes a hand back through his hair. Not to disrespect your years of experience, Connick, but there will be deaths either way. We minimize what they are able to do, then, until we can cut this off at the root.
The member of your council who is the chief liaison with the church, a very small, slight night elf woman named Imra Dakarin, raises one hand, softly glowing under the low light of this room.
Yes, Sister Imra, please enlighten us.
She folds her hands together in front of her, that extra joint at the end of her fingers curling oddly around her palms. Not that I would ever dare to disagree with General Tormare's military expertise, but we will have to explain theologically to the people how taking out the High Priestess of Kiva while she's on the run is a morally justifiable thing to do.
Elandor pauses, and he says, Everyone, I think I've arrived at a way to take out two birds with one stone. My sister, and those that follow her, draw their power from Kiva. And Kiva draws her power from the belief of the people. The belief that the people have in a goddess of fate and natural death. 50 years on from a plague that almost wiped out this entire country. I, for one, see no reason why that faith wouldn't be shaky.
Sister Imra, who at this point is the High Priestess of Kimryl, narrows her eyes at you and tilts her head to the side. Not that I'm disagreeing with the points you're making here, Your Majesty, but a religious overhaul of that magnitude would require destruction of all existent temples, evacuations of cities. It's a big move, but if you think you can pull it off, I have your back.
With as much time as I've spent out among the people hearing their prayers, I know I can pull that off. Start moving the troops out. I'm going to go attend to my wife.
And Elandor walks out.
You head out through the grand stone hallways of this castle that is now your home. Off to your chambers, you crawl into bed next to your wife. She smiles, turns over, kind of nuzzles into you. I hope it went well.
As well as it could have. We all make our choices. And then he's gonna wrap his free arm around her, pull her really close, and drift off into his trance.
You have the dream again. For the first time in decades, you find yourself on your hands and knees on the surface of this cold, still, mirror-like water. And the flash of a lighthouse that you have not seen in years illuminates the scene around you. You look down at your hands, and then when you look up, you see this rotating light flash across an 8+ foot tall skeletal figure with spiraling horns and bright purple pinpricks of light where its eyes should be.
Long time no see, kid.
Elandor gets to his feet. Lord Kimryl, I have nothing to say to you.
Oh, well, isn't that nice? I have several things to say to you, but I'll limit myself to you don't want to do this. Especially not in my name.
Elandor juts his chin out stubbornly. I am doing exactly what I have done since the first time you came to me. Exactly what has to be done.
Once again, you get the impression that this skeletal face is snarling at you.
This choice will bring about the ruin of everything you have ever sought to accomplish. Maybe not in your lifetime, maybe not for several more after it, but everything you have built is going to fall.
If you're so sure of that, why don't you stop me?
Because I can't. You're carrying around a piece of my soul inside you, remember? And passing it on to other people like lighting one candle off of another. And besides, we had a deal, and you had a choice. But choices have consequences, Elandor. I greatly look forward to watching yours.
And then you wake up.
Justice. You have the dream again. You wake up on a beach of black sand that you have not seen in decades. Far, far above your head, the light of the lighthouse where you grew up spins slowly. And Kiva is sitting on a piece of driftwood, hands folded in her lap.
Justice gets to her feet and goes over and sits on the piece of driftwood next to Kiva. Oh, well, this can't be good.
There is a pause. And then Kiva, sounding tired and sorrowful, says,
Think of this as a courtesy call from an old friend. Something is coming for you. You won't be able to escape it, but you have an opportunity to get your daughters to safety.
I would ask what's coming, but I think I already know the answer.
Kiva inclines their head at you and says,
If I had the strength to lend you to let you weather the storm, I would.
I don't live through this, do I?
Kiva shakes her head and says,
The only comfort I can give you is that we are not dead while our names are remembered. And you, Justice, have burned brightly enough to be remembered for a long time.
She closes her eyes and shakes her head softly. I've done the best I could with what I was given, but I'm scared. I don't want to be alone.
Kiva reaches out and cups your cheek in one hand.
You won't be. I'm sending someone to buy you the time that you need.
If Kiva is corporeal in this space, Justice is gonna lunge forth and hug her.
She hugs you back, super tight. And against your hair, she says,
Have courage. It'll be a blaze of glory.
And then you wake up. Barry, for the final time, please describe your character.
Justice is a bit older than the last time we saw her. If she's out moving around trying to keep a low profile, she often keeps her hair styled up around the filed down nubs where her horns used to be. But right now, it is loose around her shoulders as she shoots bolt upright in bed. She lurches forward, hands over her mouth, and just sobs for a few seconds. And then gets up, puts on several more layers, topped off by her stormy cloak with the silvery scale mail over her shoulders, and then is going to leave her room and go find her youngest daughter.
Your youngest daughter, Truth, is about the equivalent of 3 years old. She looks as much like you as the twins did at her age. She is deep in her trance. She does not stir when you walk in.
Justice is gonna scoop her up and try as hard as possible to not wake her, and then go find the twins.
The twins are also trancing in their shared room, just down the hall from the nursery. They're about the equivalent of 14 now, but you wouldn't be able to tell from the weights that sit on their shoulders.
She's gonna put Truth, still trancing, down on the nearest soft surface, and then go shake both of them awake with a finger pressed over her lips.
Elora starts to say something as she sits up, and Anya, who woke up fully first, reaches across the gap between their beds and just puts a hand on her twin's shoulder and shakes her head.
Justice looks back and forth between her daughters, chokes down another sob, and swallows really hard. They're coming. And then reaches down around her neck and pulls out a chain that is attached to a massive emerald the size of a chicken egg and hands it to Anya. Go out there. Get everybody you can. Prioritize the old, the sick, families with children. Anyone else that can't fight, tell them to run. And tell everyone else to fall back to the temple. Wait for your sister, and then go as far south as you can and take the keystone with you.
Elora, who has always been the more headstrong of your daughters, says, What? No!
This isn't up for debate. And then she's going to reach into her cloak and pull out her holy symbol, this crystal orb full of stormy magic. Anya, who is also a cleric of Kiva, already has one, but Justice presses this orb into Elora's hand and squeezes super tight. We both know what you've been able to do with the trees, with the snow. Take Truth, go out to the walls, do your best to bring down an avalanche in front of the gates, and then go meet your sister and get out of here.
But Mom! Anya squeezes her shoulder super tight, and Elora goes silent. Anya looks at you, nods, and says, Prioritize those that can't fight. Go south. I understand.
I love you. All of you so much.
Yeah, they lunge forward and both hug you super tight. Anya is the first to pull away.
She pulls back, stands up, brushes herself off, and says,
Elora, we have to hurry. Come on.
Elora, tears running down her face in sheets, pulls back, nods shakily, and then grabs her baby sister, who is still fast in her trance. And both of them carrying spell focuses that will later belong, respectively, to Aurora Valcyne and Defiance, and with the keystone that will later find its way to Ereve Enmar. The girls that will, soon after this, name themselves Mercy and Vengeance. Walk out.
After they leave, Justice gets up and moves her way out of this room, across a snow-filled square, and into the temple at Galshona, where the last of the resistance is encamped.
As you are walking across the square, a figure falls into step with you.
Long time no see, sugar.
Justice grits her teeth and inclines her head to the side. Mia, don't suppose you're here to bring me another present?
My presence is your present, darling.
A great comfort in my hour of need, I'm sure. She charges across the square, casting a thaumaturgy spell to make her voice louder and amplified, echoing off the stones of the city. All right, everyone who can wield a sword, into the temple. Once everyone else is out, bar the doors.
Everyone who is not gathering at the portal stone starts walking with you towards the temple. Mia, at your side, leans over and says,
You know, they ain't gonna remember that you were scared. Not gonna remember what you lost, either. But when it comes to stories like this, they remember how you died, and not much else.
They're not going to remember me at all. I get that you were sent here to offer me comfort, and that your journey, and Kimryl's journey, and Kiva's journey have been much longer than mine. But I know my brother. I know what he wants. How many people like me have you seen die? Nameless and purposeless, Mia. The best thing you can do now is be honest with me.
They step in front of you, tilt their head to the side, eyes flashing strangely.
Honestly? You think I didn't have friends, sisters, a lover or two? My home was rubble long before Celea fell. I have seen more people fade into obscurity than you have ever known. But,
and Mia smiles like a gash in the face of the world, not a single one of them has been forgotten. I remember all of them.
Will you remember me?
Mia's eyes flash again, and they pull 2 daggers out of sheaths on their hips.
Sweetheart, there's no forgetting you. 17.
17 what?
That's how many I took out from the hole I died in. 17. Before one of them got me.
Justice walks over to one of the many weapon stockpiles within this temple, pulls out a sword, looks over at Mia, and smiles. Sad and bitter and defiant. I think I'm gonna shoot for 18.
Mia throws their head back and laughs.
You can try, darling. No one's beat my record yet.
They shift into a fighting stance just inside these doors, knives out. Justice, you find yourself back to back with Mia after the Astrarian forces outside beat the door down. And you find yourself at the center of a tide of death. You are reacting more than thinking. You cast every spell you have in you, and then after you run out, you are just slamming your shield into people and running as many of them through with your sword as you can. But the forces you had left were not large, and there seems to be no limit to the battalions at your door. This temple starts to fill with bodies, but you think you get at least 18. Eventually, even Mia's seemingly inexhaustible energy runs out. They go down to one knee, coughing up acid and ichor. And your brother walks in the door. He is wearing fine, decorated armor, holding his knife in one hand and a sword in the other.
And at this point, Justice has taken more than a few licks. I think she has fallen back against the plinth that the Kiva statue in this temple sits upon, and just sort of leans back against the stone and meets his gaze. I told you it was gonna come to this.
Your brother looks around at the bodies littering the floor of this temple. He sets his jaw, firm and proud and stubborn as ever. It doesn't have to end this way, Dorella.
My name is Justice. And yes, it does.
He steps closer, adjusts his grip on Kimryl's blade, and says, "You still have a choice."
She drops her shield to the floor with a clatter, and then reaches out to grab his hand. I've made my choice. Make yours.
And that is where we're going to end this week.
So when we said generational trauma,
We meant it.
like 10,000 years of generational trauma.
And now that we have this context, we will be back with Leo and Fee.
Next time on Compelled Duel. Hey everybody, Barry here with the postscript, just clearing up a couple housekeeping things here at the end of the episode. As always, I'm going to go ahead and plug our social media profiles. You can find us on Twitter, Tumblr, and TikTok at Compelled Duel. We have lots of other cool stuff going on, however, an official website, an official Spotify profile, our official merch store, stuff like that. You can find all that stuff linked on any of our various social media profiles. If you're interested in supporting the show, we ask that you consider heading over to patreon.com/compelledduel, where starting at just $2 a month, you can get access to all kinds of cool patron perks, including early access to episodes, access to exclusive playlists and bonus content, and even handwritten letters from your favorite character every month. If you're interested in supporting the show in ways other than pledging to our Patreon, we ask that if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that you leave us a rating and a review, since that helps the show get promoted to a wider audience. We host a weekly Q&A show on our YouTube every week, and we would love to see you show up for that, ask a couple questions. We always have a really fun time. And as always, if you like what you're hearing on the show, we ask that you just tell a couple friends about it. And if they like it, ask them to tell a couple friends as well. Word of mouth advertising is the most powerful tool we have at our disposal. Our next episode's going to be going live on Friday, March 25th, 2022. Or if you're a member of our Patreon, you're going to be getting early access to that on Thursday, March 24th. It's been a few weeks, huh? See you guys next time.